So I have open in Photoshop my macro, or you could have your still life picture. And then I have the picture of the person I am going to insert into my other picture. So with this, you have selection tools in Photoshop. And essentially what it does is it cuts out things. Or if you select things, it'll only allow you to edit those parts of the picture. So let me show you where the selection tools are. These are all selection tools. Like you can select a rectangle. Just for example, just look here. If I select her here, if I go up to images and adjustments and I like change something, it will only change what's in that selection. So like you can, do like cool collages and things like that. You also have to select something in order to copy and paste it. So I have her selected now right there. If I press Control C or go up to edit and copy and then edit and paste, you can't right click in Photoshop to do edit or copy and paste, which is kind of annoying. But look at, I just copied and pasted her. I have my layer panel open here. If it's not open, make sure that you open it. And I have, if I turn these layers on and off, look at, I just copied and pasted a rectangle of her. And it's sitting on top of the original photo. So in your layers panel, you can see when you copy and paste, it puts it on its own layer. That way you can do things like you could erase. And when I erase, I'm gonna just do this. If I'm on this layer, it's gonna erase what's on that layer. And that seems a little strange right now, but it'll make sense in a minute. See, before I was on the background and I actually started erasing the background layer, which I don't wanna do. I'm just gonna Control Z and step back a couple. Okay, so I really wouldn't need to select a rectangle in this instance. So I'm going to delete that. Oops, I'm going to step back a couple so I don't have her face faded. Okay, so I can just delete that layer. We need a more specific selection, and we want to select her so she's like perfectly selected. So the key for this project is to get some really, really accurate selections. So you can see here, there's a couple other selection tools. Like if you randomly needed to do a shape, you could do this lasso tool. This one, if you have straight edges, if you had a building you were selecting, this is a great one. It does straight selections. So you can like really trace something in a really straight way. If something is selected, nothing else will be affected. So I sometimes will not know that I have something selected. It'll be like, for instance, this little tiny spot because I accidentally clicked on a selection tool, and then I'll go to like do my adjustments and nothing else will work. Like look at it, looks like none of these are working. It's because it's only adjusting what's in that selection. So sometimes if my tools aren't working, I'll just deselect just to make sure that is not what I accidentally did. So when you select something, to unselect it, we call that deselecting. You can press Control D and then start over again. So as long as that area is selected, nothing else will be adjusted, which can kind of be annoying sometimes. So sometimes if my tools aren't working, I'll press Control D just to make sure I didn't randomly select something. Okay. So there's these selection tools. This magnetic lasso tool, that would be the only thing in college that we could do. And you kind of drag along things and it tries to find the edge. But I'm going to show you an even easier one there. So this new feature in Photoshop, if you're on, you have to be on this selection tool. So this is new, and it is, if you watch the little demo, if you just click and drag over something, it selects the edge. However, you don't even have to go that far. When you're on this tool, at the top, there's a button that says Select Subject. So if you click that, I always try that first now because it's so easy. You click it, you let it load, and you see how good a job it does. So go ahead and go down on that little square with the arrow tool, and the Select Subject should appear at the top. Look at it, it did like almost a perfect job. So some of you with the black background, you might get weird selections, like where you're fading into the background. I'll show you how to fix that in just a second. So it just kind of seems like if you have just one thing in the picture that's an obvious focal point, this usually works every time. If you have something that's a little bit more complicated, you can try this one with the square and arrow where you just click and drag over the item. Or this is the one that is really easy as well, the quick selection tool. It's a paintbrush with dots around it. And pretty much what you do is you click and drag, and it kind of, I'll show you here. Like, look, if I click and drag on things, it kind of clings to the edge of things. If it over selects in an area and doesn't do a perfect job with this one, you can put it on a minus or hold Alt to make it minus and just like drag it back in. If the select subject isn't perfect, I'll show you something. So you can, instead of, yeah, that's okay. We're going to fix that in just a second. So here's the quick selection tool. That is going to be on another screen here in a second. So this is it's the paintbrush I think you're looking for with the plus or minus. It's right here. So, but actually with the select subject, if it did a decent job, what I'm going to have you all do is just to go to the button next to the select subject and select and mask. Because if you were to just copy and paste this, a lot of times it looks really choppy. So when you click select and mask, you get to this window here. So when you go into the select and mask area, right here under view, you can look at your selection and different colors and different backgrounds. And it just depends on your picture what works better. But you can see like her a leaf by her foot got picked up. Her shoes are a little strange because they're in the grass. This new Photoshop, so you can click through here to kind of see the edges. So it's a little rough around her feet, maybe her hair a little bit too. So if yours isn't perfect, don't worry yet. This is new as well in Photoshop, refine hair. I'm just going to click that just to see what it does. So let me see. If I go to the black and white, I can kind of see it might have like taken away too much of her hair. Control Z will step back if you don't like what it does. But these like auto things are pretty awesome. Okay, so if you have part of your selection that needs to be adjusted, these brushes on the side on the left are going to help you with that. So see, this is the quick selection tool, the same tool that is on the main Photoshop page. It has a plus and a minus. So you can use your brackets on your keyboard to adjust your brush size. This is on the plus side, so it's going to add to the selection. And look, I can go back and trace, but look, it's kind of having trouble with the background and her hair, but I can go to the minus and I can get rid of it a little. So this is where you guys can go in and just do little clicks, make your brush really small, and you can add or subtract with that little quick selection tool to your selection. So you paint around the edge of it. Her foot, that was a weird thing. I'm going to go to minus and we're going to get rid of that. Now I'm going to change the view because sometimes it's hard to see exactly what's going on. Like some of her face is actually getting cut off. So I want to make sure I add that back in. So this is that quick selection tool. You can, it's the same thing that's on the other main page, and it just kind of adds or subtracts to your selection. But look at on the red, I can really see it well. So her little foot, her shoe is a little bit strange, but it's just because it's in the grass. Anything that has a wispy or like hair or just to soften the edge, there's this wispy brush, you guys, the second one down. I like to go along the hair with this, and this will like naturally bring back little like fur or hair and things like that. Just make sure your brush is nice and tiny. Sometimes I'll even go around, like it'll break away if you have grass, like the grass on her shoes. Look at, I'm going with that wispy tool over her shoe, and it eliminates the green from the grass. Like the shape of the grass is still there, but it eliminates the green from the grass. So I can kind of go back and forth with that wispy tool. And then the other brush is just a solid, it'll bring back, it's not going to cling to the edge or anything. It's just going to go back and forth. Like I can bring back the background. You can play with the hardness or softness of that and the plus or minus. But if there's something that's not going away with the quick selection tool, like the edge of her hair was not going away. Oops, I'm going to Control Z if I do too much. Just step back. I just have to clean up a few of this, like by her foot on the minus sign, to really clean that up. And then I just look at it in different views to make sure it looks okay. Oops, there's a little bit there too. Learn to use these tools. Like you can get it to look almost perfect. You just might have to change the brush size, kind of zoom in. So guys, remember, you can Control plus to zoom into areas, Control minus to zoom out. Your brackets on your keyboard next to the P, the left one makes your brush smaller, the right one makes it bigger. You can change the hardness and softness. And so you just kind of go through these things. Like it's a little messy here. You'd rather it be a little fuzzy on the edges. That way it'll blend with wherever you're going to paste it. So I could change the hardness to make this a little softer. So these brushes are really, really helpful. Look at the plus and minus to make sure you know whether it's going to add or take away from the selection. On the right side, you guys, on this one, the radius, if you drag that, it dissolves the edge. If I'm looking at the edge of her clothes and stuff, it'll make them a little bit like dissolved and a little more blended. I sometimes will take the wispy brush though and kind of go along even the edges where they look a little choppy. It's bringing back a little of the background, but I can always erase that later too if I need to. So I'm just always playing. The radius kind of dissolves the edge. If it's something that's a smooth object, like we're not, as people, we're not going to be a smooth edge, but if you were to select a marble or something, you could smooth it. Feather will just make it kind of soft on the edge. So sometimes I'll feather it just a little. That also kind of makes the edge fuzzy. And then if you over selected or under selected, you can always shift the edge in or out here too. So I look at it on different views just to make sure it looks okay. I like to look at it here at the very end on this bottom view so I can really see, okay, like there's a little background here where her hair is. I can choose to go in with a really tiny brush and get that if I want to. I'm just on that solid brush. Oh, I did a little too much. I'm going to bring it back. Is anyone's not working? Sometimes on our computers with Photoshop, it gets glitchy. So if you have anything random in the background that's selected that you don't need selected, you guys, you can just quickly erase it with this third brush down. This is just a solid, it'll add or subtract a selection. The wispy brush dissolves the edge and makes hairs and stuff stand out. The brush, the quick selection tool with the dots, will just add or subtract the edge of the selection, like it tries to find the edge. I'm wondering if her hair is a little bit transparent, if I should bring some of this back with the plus. Yeah, it looked like it got a little transparent, but I want to leave that fuzzy edge. You don't want the edges to be hard. Okay, so I think she looks pretty good. When you're done, I'm going to hit OK. And she's going to pop back up, all perfectly selected. It's kind of hard to tell at the moment, but she is selected really nicely. And now what I can do is just copy and paste her onto my other picture. So I'm going to go to Edit, Copy, or Control C. And then I'm going to go over to the macro photography and Edit and Paste, or Control V. And just hit OK if a little message pops up. But then you can see she's on her own layer right on top of the macro picture. Okay, so as soon as you get your person copied and pasted over onto the macro, let's go up and save this. It's going to save as a Photoshop file, and that's what we want because you now have two layers, and we want to preserve the layers. If you were to save it as a JPEG, it would flatten the image, and your layers would be gone, and you can't move your person around anymore. So I'm going to file Save As once I get the myself or the person on the flower or the backdrop. And now I'm just going to save this and let it save as that blue PSD file. So see, it says Photoshop file. And then I'm just going to say, I'm going to call this Big World. Okay. So it's going to save as this little PSD file there. All right. So I want it to be that. When I turn it in, I'm going to eventually save it as a JPEG, but right now I'm saving it as a Photoshop file. If your Photoshop is being glitchy and this next part does not work, you might have to close Photoshop, reopen that PSD file that you just saved. Because I noticed in my other classes, this is where it kind of was lagging a little. So File, Save As. So once you get this over here, you can use the eraser tool. It's E on your keyboard and it's down here. And you can, if you need to, erase a little bit more. You can do that. My opacity is kind of turned down on my eraser tool. But like say you didn't get everything from the original one, you can start to erase here. Let's see, mine took a minute. Mine's a little bit slow right now too. So she was standing on grass. Her shoes are a little bit strange. So I might have to make them blend with the background a bit. Okay. So anytime you have something and you want to change the size or transform it, you're going to press Control-T on your keyboard. And this is where if this doesn't work, you might have to restart Photoshop. But when you press Control-T, it puts a bounding box around the layer that you Control-T'd. So I'm on my person layer. And then you should be able to, you guys, drag this from the corner, make it bigger or smaller. You should be able to, if you go off the side of the corner, you can rotate this. So Control-T has lots of options. You can go to the corner, drag it, you can rotate it. You can right click and you can flip if you need to be like the opposite way. So you just right click and go flip horizontal to the bottom. Right click, flip. So kind of look at the light and how it's hitting you and just see which way you should be. You can also, if you hold Control and go to one of the corners, it will skew and tilt you in weird ways. And then if you hold Shift, when you drag these, you can squish things and distort things too if you drag that. So you want to get yourself down to size. I kind of liked the ones where they're like really tiny, but it's kind of up to you. I'm wondering if I should put her like in this raindrop, and her coloring's off right now too. We're going to fix that. So see, the tinier you make yourself, the more that it's kind of like, well, you can't see all the details as much anyway. I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger, but feel free to just use whatever size you want. When you're Control-T'ing, you guys, sometimes things will look pixelated, but that will go away after you hit enter. So whenever you get it to the size you want it, you just hit enter when you're done. You've got to hit enter to clear it up. So I'm just like moving her around to see like, where do I want her? I kind of want her in like a puddle maybe. I think that's cool. Like maybe there. Okay, so now she's in place, you guys. She's way too bright for the coloring here. And you might need to add like a shadow or reflection for your person. It just depends on the setting. So I want to talk to you about that. First of all, her feet kind of is strange with the water. It kind of looks like she's sinking into the water. But to make it look like it a bit more, I'm going to take the eraser tool. And the eraser tool is just like it's a brush tool. So you can make it harder or softer. I'm going to like make it not so fuzzy. And I'm going to like make my brush really tiny and just kind of zoom in. And I don't know, should I make it look like her feet? So maybe her feet should not, I think I'd see them through the water a little bit. So I'm going to make the opacity of my brush. You can change the strength of your eraser by going to opacity. And then look, I'm just going to like slowly kind of make her feet transparent. So any little thing that you need to adjust or fade, you can go back in and, you know, use this eraser tool. Like I'm actually noticing by her hand, there's like a little gap. I didn't erase that part. So I'm going to make it 100% opacity. I'm going to go in with kind of a tiny, tiny eraser and just like fix. Oh, I guess that's her dress though behind it. I don't know. I'm going to just put the background. So the background will show through if I erase her hand. So use the eraser tool. It's E on your keyboard, or that it's halfway down your toolbar. Play with the opacity and the hardness of your brush, the size of your brush, and just erase the things that don't need to be there. Like I have a couple little splotchy things that I notice. Zoom in really close by pressing Control-Z and just kind of see, is there anything you need to touch up with the eraser tool? Make your brush really tiny, zoom way in. So you can't bring things back. That's the only thing. If you notice part of her face is missing or something, I'd have to go back to this picture and go back into the selection tool and then reselect it or reselect and mask just to make it look a little better. Once you get your person down to the correct size, and, you know, I've erased the feet a little bit to make it look like she's sinking into the water. Now I want to think about the reflection or shadow that might be occurring from her being put into the scene. So I kind of have to think about and look closely about like to see where the original shadows on the photo lie. So it looks like the light source is coming from behind her because the shadows from the water droplets are in front of the water droplets. So I think her shadow would do the same and it would kind of be here. So it's hard with this one because there's reflective areas. So that could have like a reflection of her, where the other areas would have like a shadow. So we have to decide whether to do a shadow or reflection. So one really easy way to do a shadow, and it just depends on your work, is you could paint one in. So make sure your layers panel's open and you can see your layers. If you don't see your layers panel, you can always go to window and down to layers, and it should pop up. So what you're going to do is add a new layer. So there's this little plus sign, and you could just use a paintbrush, be on the keyboard, and paint a shadow underneath something. If it depends on where the light source is. So sometimes this is the easiest way. When something is painted on its own layer, you can erase it without affecting the other layers. So I could go to the eraser tool and erase it. I could also just turn down the opacity or the strength of the layer. And obviously that's what I do here. I don't want it to be a hard shadow. You can go to your arrow tool and you can move it around independently from everything else because it's its own layer. So this shadow layer I painted, it's on top of the little girl. So I'd actually want to move it behind the little girl. You can also click on layers and like drag them around. So now it goes behind her little legs. So that's a really easy way to create a shadow. You can also, with this paint that you just added, Control T it if you need it to be like a little bit different size or something like that. So just choose the right softness of paintbrush. I did a really nice soft brush. Put it on its own layer so you're able to erase it. You're able to move it around. You're able to play with the opacity. Another options for shadow is to actually copy the shape of the little girl and fill it with black. So I'm going to show you that next. So all I have to do to copy and paste is I have to select it and I have to copy and paste it. So she's already perfectly selected, so we don't need to go through that process again. I can just choose like the rectangle selection tool and I can select her, or Control A selects the whole layer, and it's fine. She's the only thing on the layer. So select her and then copy and paste, Control C, Control V. And then I'm going to want to think about where her reflection or shadow would be. So I'm going to Control T. I'm going to right click and I'm going to flip her vertically. And then I usually just try to line up their feet. So you can see her feet are a little off. I'm going to rotate this by going to the corner of the box, and you get those little curved arrows. And remember with Control T, sometimes it'll look a little pixelated at first, but once you hit enter, it should sharpen up. So you can also distort this by holding Control and going to a corner, and like you can skew this if you need to. If you hold Shift, you can squish it if it's too long. So Control and Shift will allow you to distort it. I'm going to hit enter. And of course that looks pretty silly. If this were just a reflection on water, I could just turn down the opacity and have it be a reflection. I think for this one though, it would actually be a shadow. So for reflections, you just turn down the opacity. For a shadow, I'm actually going to go up to Edit, Fill. So I have to make sure I'm on the shadow layer. And then I'm going to choose black under contents. And then I'm just going to keep this where it's at. I have to click this preserve transparency box so it just fills her and not the whole layer. I'm just going to click OK. And now I have a shadow in the shape of her. I can play with the opacity of that some more. And then sometimes it's a little bit too sharp. So I like to make it a little blurry or fuzzy. And you can do that by going up to Filter, Blur, and then Gaussian blur. You can move this over. If you look at the shadow, you can see it'll start to blur a little. So the other shadows are quite sharp. So that's another thing you want to keep in mind too. Try to match the opacity, like the shade, to match kind of the other shadows as well. So I'm going to keep it pretty sharp. I just blurred it a little bit, and I'm going to turn down the opacity a little bit more. So the last part of this is I just kind of dragged the shadow underneath the little girl, and I did play with it a little bit. I felt like it was a little bit off. So that's kind of as it's kind of a guessing game and you using your best judgment as far as where that would fall. So I just kind of move it around and play with it and then hit enter. So after I'm done with that, I feel like the little girl, and I sometimes if I can't find which layer she's on, I just click the eye icon and it'll go on and off. So I'm going to go to the layer with the little girl. She's on this layer because I turned it on and off and saw that. I'm going to go up and just try to play with her brightness, her contrast, and the tone of her. There is under image and adjustments, like sometimes I just go in like maybe brightness and contrast. Maybe turn down her brightness just a little. I think she'd be a little less sharp. So contrast she had a lot of contrast. I'm going to turn it down a little. But then also she's a little too blue. This is a very warm photo. So image, adjustments, color balance. So I just usually play with this. That's way better. See, just being a little more red. I play with that color balance to just get her to like look like she's integrated into the scene. So I'm just going to kind of play with, adjust the color balance to see. And sometimes I have to go back and forth and kind of see. I think that looks a lot more natural. Okay, so when you're done, you can just go File, save it, because you already saved it as a PSD. And then to turn it into me, though, make sure you go File, Save as a Copy. And by saving it as a copy, you're going to save it as a JPEG. That's going to smush all the layers together. So always make sure you have the PSD there. Then when you're completely done, you go and save it as a JPEG. And then it'll just essentially take a picture of this file so you can put it on your website and turn it into Teams. So I'm going to click OK. But if I give you feedback and I say I want you to change something, you have that Photoshop file so that you can get back into your layers and be able to re-edit the file.